Suspended Labour MP Mike Amesbury has been sent to prison, but is it enough? We'll have a little chat about it in this video, because many people might think that this is not enough and that it's some sort of two-tier justice. Well, you may feel that it is, but there's a reason that it isn't, but I'll come to that. You can make up your own mind during this video. And also a bit later in the video, which I hope you'll stick around for, Bridget Phillipson talking about these breakfast clubs and spending your money on breakfast for children, which I just don't think adds up, but a lot more about that a little bit later in the video, so stick around for that. So first of all, please do subscribe to the channel if you like this approach. But you'll remember that Mike Amesbury was filmed punching a man to the ground, and he pleaded guilty last month to assault by beating, otherwise known as battery. Now, there are sentencing guidelines for this, but during the assault, he was recorded on video to say, "You won't threaten the MP ever again, will you?" And there was no aggression apparently by this man, and only aggression by Mike Amesbury. He's reported by the BBC to say that this was highly regrettable and he was sincerely sorry, but that didn't help him to avoid prison time. So he's been sent to prison for 10 weeks, but he will serve 40%. Now, the fact that he's been given a custodial sentence means that there can be a recall petition, which means constituents can vote to remove him from his seat in Parliament, and if more than 10% of voters vote to do so, he'll be removed as the MP for Runcorn and Helsby, and a by-election will be triggered for a new MP to stand to represent that area. Amazingly, he asked for bail so he could appeal the sentence, but this was refused. He's told that he's going to serve 40% of his sentence in custody and the rest spent on licence. That just means when you're given a determinate sentence, a period of time, in this case 10 weeks, you serve a proportion of it. He will serve 40% in custody and the remainder on licence. That means if he were to do anything else, let's say for example he were to punch anybody else again afterwards, he'd be recalled to prison for that remainder of this sentence and sentenced for any new offence, and the court will take all of that into account if there's a subsequent offence afterwards. But he was refused bail, and a prison van was seen at the back of the court building, picked him up and took him off to prison. And so now doubtless people are going to look back at previous sentences and say, well, prison sentences were handed out for unrest around the country, around the riots and the protests and so on. People in those cases were sent to prison for social media posts that were said to be calling for violent disorder, stirring up racial hatred and all these kind of things. Now, I have to say that on the one hand, they might appear to be two-tier justice, because in many of those cases they were given 20-month sentences and so on. But at the same time, they were very different offences, and there are very different sentencing guidelines for each of these. So if in the case that you disagree with this sentence, it really is the sentencing guidelines that you need to look to rather than the judge, or in this case the chief magistrate in this case, because it really isn't their fault. They are working to the guidelines. So I do have to stress that there shouldn't be any criticism of the deputy chief magistrate, in this case here, because they must follow the sentencing guidelines for the case at hand. And if it was supposed to be a more serious sentence, they should make a more serious charge. And even in some of these cases, the judges were saying if they wanted harsher sentences, they should be charging them with rioting rather than violent disorder or inciting violence and so on. But you remember some of these, and some of the worst of these, when there were videos of them, what was noted as roaring encouragement at rioters on his Instagram, and he was jailed for 2 years. In another case, jailed for 38 months for stirring up racial hatred by using social media. You remember that was the one that they were calling for people to descend on a hotel and set it alight. Now, you might then think, well, how is that more serious than punching somebody to the ground, because that's a physical altercation? As I say, completely different offences, completely different guidelines, and the courts and the judges and deputy chief magistrate in this case follow those guidelines, and they arrive at the conclusion that they should do following those guidelines. And so in this case here, we have one set of guidelines, which is for common assault, racially or religiously aggravated common assault, battery, which is also referred to as assault by beating, common assault on emergency worker, etc. And so you go through these sentencing guidelines, you look at the level of culpability, first deciding culpability and harm, and you come down to a table, and ultimately they look at all of the facts and the circumstances, aggravating factors, mitigating factors, and they arrive at the appropriate sentence here. There is also what we call the custody threshold. Has the custody threshold been passed? And quite simply, the custody threshold is reached when one offence or multiple offences taken together that are associated are so serious that a fine alone nor a community order will be suitably justified for this sentence for this offence. And so in that case, the custody threshold is passed, and that's why you see in some of these, you will see that they range from a community order to a custodial sentence. And in this particular case here, the range going up to 16 weeks custody. So the court there has arrived at this 10 weeks custody as the appropriate sentence in this case for this offence, because that's what was charged, and all of the facts and the circumstances. So the 10 weeks in this case, on the face of it, was perfectly appropriate. And of course, what comes into play in many of these cases, and of course the sad case of Peter Lynch, many of them pleaded guilty, whereas if they pleaded not guilty, they may well have been found not guilty, as opposed to pleading guilty and then, of course, sentenced on the offence that they've been charged with. And so many of those cases, many people feel should have pleaded not guilty, but they feel that they were pressured into pleading guilty. And of course, it's very difficult to know what you would do in that very same situation. But as I say, very different offence, very different sentencing guidelines, and sentenced in accordance with those guidelines. So let me know what you think about that in the comments, and there's much more to come. Don't go away. On another topic, just for a moment, as a content creator, at least once a week, I get somebody trying to imitate me, literally copy me. They steal my face profile photo. They steal my bio sometimes. They try to make a username that looks like mine. Then they steal my videos, or they comment to you in the comment section trying to make you think that they are me, and they try to enlist you in some kind of scam or something or other. And it's really frustrating. And I have to deal with that on a weekly basis. And so that's something that you don't often see. But the other thing you don't often see is when we get clients come to us who have literally had their identity stolen, and they've had fraudsters taking out loans in their name. Mobile phone contracts are a big one because they order phones and they get the phone with it, and obviously they have no intention of paying it back. They just leave my client with the problem of sorting it all out, and the thief then goes off with the phone and sells it. And all of this happens because these fraudsters get hold of just enough of their information to be able to impersonate them. Personal identity theft is a massive problem, and that is why I consistently talk about it on this channel, and it is why that I quite sincerely and genuinely partner with Incogni to help to prevent you from falling victim to identity theft. So if you haven't signed up with Incogni just yet, you might want to think of doing so, because what Incogni does is contacts all of the data brokers and marketing companies that put together your information, and they sell it onto third parties. You might remember that little wording at the bottom, we may share your information and data with third parties. What they don't often tell you is that they might sell it to third parties, and so you are literally up for sale. There was an interesting advert or something or other I saw just the other day where it was like an auction room, and they were auctioning this lady's information, and that is literally what they are doing. But what Incogni does is they contact all of these data brokers and marketers. They use UK law and US law, and they insist and require that they remove your data from their servers, so they can no longer sell you on again and again. Because what happens is, once they've sold your information enough times, it will inevitably end up in the hands of fraudsters, who then try to impersonate you and steal your identity. Then they take out loans in your name, and then you end up going to a lawyer to try to sort it out. Worse still, you end up on the fraud database, and you just won't get a bank account after that. They'll close you down. They'll close all your accounts, all your credit cards, mobile phones, anything that's got any form of credit attached to it, they'll close it down. That is exactly what happened to clients of mine, which is why I support NordVPN on this channel. And of course, as one of their partners, I get you a fantastic discount, which is 60% off, 60% off a plan using the code BlackBelt. Use the code BlackBelt at the description. Of course, you get a 30-day money-back guarantee to change your mind once you see how it works, but you get access to a dashboard, and you'll see the progress of all these companies confirming that they've got information on you and confirming that they've deleted it, which is very much more than just a little peace of mind once you realize just how many companies are erasing your data from their servers. So take advantage of it. It is a massive discount, 60% off, using the code BlackBelt with the link in the description below. And not only will that reduce all the spam and junk marketing that you receive, but it will will definitely reduce your financial risk of being impersonated. So check it out, and thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video. This is a controversial one because it might sound like I'm having a go at children and a charity for children, which of course I'm not. The charity is a worthy cause, I support it, and this is not to attack them at all. What it is, however, is to just fact check and take a realization check a little bit about Labour, and in particular Bridget Phillipson's claims regarding this and whether they really stack up. Because already, lo and behold, it appears that the numbers don't quite hang together. So if you do like these brutally honest, objective analyses, then please do subscribe to the channel. I depend on you to do that. That's the only thing that helps my channel grow. So what are we talking about here? This is these breakfast clubs, starting with her tweet here. She says, "Our breakfast clubs." Now, already I've got a problem with this wording because there's two problems with this. First of all, it's not Labour's breakfast clubs, because this Magic Breakfast, which was one of the providers, was already in operation. In fact, it was established in 2003, so it's not theirs at all. But even if it's not using them, and if it's using other suppliers and so on, it's still not Labour's breakfast clubs, because Labour is not paying for it. It's the taxpayer that's paying for it. So I've already got a problem with that, but let's continue. "Our breakfast clubs rollout," she says, "will save parents up to £450 a year." Now, that £450 doesn't stack up either, but I'll come back to that in a minute. "And will have a huge impact on children's education," which is also debatable, and I'll tell you why in a minute. "Their attainment and well-being." So children's education, their attainment and well-being. And I sort of have a bit of a debate about each of those things, but notwithstanding, let's at least hear what she had to say. It's pretty much a repeat of the tweet, but let's listen to this.
The commitment that I'm setting out today around the first 750 new free breakfast clubs that will be opening in April across England, that will make such a big difference.
Just pausing there. You'll key note the word there, new. So the first 750 new ones. So that doesn't mean these didn't exist at all. This is sort of very clever word manipulation. It's designed to make many people think, oh, this is a new idea. These are the first of its kind. It's a groundbreaking event that these new things are opening. Not quite true. She said the first 750 new places. So let's listen to that again.
The first 750 new free breakfast clubs that will be opening in April across England, that will make such a big difference to children's life chances, to parents' ability to work, but crucially, it's the club and not just the breakfast. And the impact on children's education, their attainment, their well-being is enormous.
So that's it. So I do have a few challenges to this. The one element that I can see some assistance with is parents being able to get to work earlier, but only by 30 minutes, and they still have to get the children to the breakfast club, which means the school has to have staff at the breakfast club earlier, which is another point I'll come back to in a minute. I do challenge, however, how effective that will be to really assist parents in getting into work because of that extra 30 minutes. I've got a few stories about that I'll come back to in a minute, but the main thing is, how on earth is having these clubs for children to eat breakfast going to suddenly improve their attainment and their chances in life? Reality check, it won't, because, sadly it won't. It's just not going to have a material difference across the board. Now, these breakfast clubs that they're rolling out, 30-minute sessions before school, so it's first thing in the morning, it's getting them up earlier, it's getting them in and giving them some kind of breakfast. Now, the problem with that is this. There's lots of problems rolling out in this. First of all, if we look at, and I'll try and remember to link these articles below, from iNews, it reports here that this flagship breakfast club policy is already under threat. Schools have revealed that this scheme offers only basic funding of 60 pence per pupil. So the school has to have staff there, they have to open the school, they've got to make sure it's cleaned and ready and safe and open, and security and lights and heat and everything else is paid for. But the additional staff, the additional administration, it is a environment of care. They have to have absolute administration in line to ensure those children are safe, to ensure they are there, to ensure the doors are locked, all of the rest of it, just as though it's open at normal time for school. That, if you've never worked in a school environment before, I've never worked as a teacher, but I've done voluntary teaching for martial arts and things like that. One of my stories I'll come back to in a minute. It is a logistical and administrative nightmare for schools to have these children taken care of. But all of that aside, they get a funding rate of 60 pence per pupil. Now, the £450 thing doesn't really stack up. It's floated out there as I can only infer as a combination of what the breakfasts would cost and what they sort of estimate that the parents would pay for this daycare club, whatever, first thing in the morning otherwise. But there's no real stats on that I can see. But as somebody pointed out in the X comment threads, if you take a look at Asda, for example, by way of example, a box of shredded wheat with 24 biscuits in it. One is probably enough for a child of that size, maybe two, but a box of those is only £3.25, which works out to 13.5 pence per piece. Splash of milk, breakfast done. Two boxes for £5, which then brings the price down even further. So they are giving these schools 60 pence, thinking that that's enough, but not taking into account everything else they have to spend. So the shortfalls, Simon Kidwell, who is the principal of Hertford Manor in Cheshire, said that this scheme would leave his school with a shortfall of £4,000. To break even, they would have to increase the planned pupil to staff ratio or reduce the food expenditure. And he said, as you can see, the margins are very tight and we haven't accounted for any admin costs, staff training costs, heating, lighting, energy associated with food preparation. This government impact assessment states that the school will benefit financially from the breakfast clubs, as the policy allows them to reallocate their budgets to other priority areas, which sounds all a little bit nonsense, really. It seems to suggest that here's the budget, but you're allowed to reallocate it somewhere for priority areas. It also says that it will save parents more than £400 a year and help children concentrate. Now, I've had people write into me to say that they work in a school and they've had these things going on already, nothing to do with Labour, but they've had these going on already. Some of the parents don't like it because they have to get there early. Some of the children don't like it because they have to get there early, and children don't tend to like getting up early. And even when they are there, they don't tend to eat very well because they don't have the appetite that first thing in the morning. Even if they do eat, they're then tired to start school because of what they eat and so on. And so all sorts of different feedback that I've been given there. But also wider concerns that if this rolls out nationally, then it says here, Oxford County Council has agreed to spend £120,000 to identify barriers to rollout, including any extra costs. So they've agreed to spend £120,000 to identify barriers to the rollout. So I've got 120,000 ideas of potential barriers to roll out, and that is the cost. And the cost of identifying those barriers has been allocated as £120,000. You see the problem. And so surveys here have suggested that there's a real cause for concern here. And so taking all of this into account, some primary schools invited to trial this have already pulled out or are taking a financial hit after being told that the basic funding rate is just 60 pence per pupil. But I have to come back and challenge these numbers somewhat here, because there is a logic flaw in this entire argument. First of all, they are saying that it will save parents up to £450 a year, and this is Labour's breakfast club, and it's going to have an impact on their education, etc. However, if they're not already paying that, then it's not saving them that per year, is it? Because if they are not giving them breakfast, then they're not spending the money on breakfast. Because if they're not already buying this breakfast for their children, for whatever reason, either they just won't or they can't, then it's not saving them that amount of money, is it? Because they're not spending it in the first place. Likewise, if they're not spending the money on the club, if the school charges for a club preschool, then they're not spending it already, so it's not saving them that money already. So in that sense, it's not saving them the money, it is just taking it from one person and giving it to another. So therefore, it is asking everybody to pick up the bill to fulfill these places, which it seems are allocated at 60 pence per child, and the school's saying that there's all sorts of costs that they just haven't accounted for. And yet they are selling the idea to you that it's going to save parents up to £450 a year. The numbers don't stack up, the logic doesn't stack up, and ultimately it would be the taxpayer that's paying for it, and it is coming from somewhere else, because it isn't just falling out of the sky, it is being picked up somewhere else. And that leads then nicely into, if they, and they should include Bridget Phillipson as the Education Secretary, if they collectively care so much about the quality of children's education across the board, as they are so happy to insistently repeat that they care about all children and that all children should have this great education, why then are they slapping 20% VAT on private school fees in the middle of an academic year, which is forcing so many children out and costing, in some cases, over £8,000 a year in taxi fees to send them somewhere else? Because £8,000 a year from one child on one set of taxi fees that the local authority has had to pay for is a significant amount of money. Now, £8,000 divided by 60 pence is 13,333 breakfasts. So for that one child alone that they've had to pay these taxis for, that could have funded over 13,000 breakfasts at 60 pence, if that's what's allocated to each of these children. So how many, we don't know yet, but here's just an open question, which they should be able to answer. They should be able to dig up the statistics for this, because otherwise they have no clue what impact their policy has had upon schools around the country and children around the country from these private schools. How many children are in that situation where they've been forced out because there are no places in the local area, and the local authority has had to pay for their taxis to ferry them 25 miles away at £8,000 per child to take them to another school? And I bet that they're not organised enough that the child has carpooled with anybody else. And even if they do, how are they going to do a risk assessment of putting 2 or 3 children in the same taxi from different areas, sending them to another school 25 miles away? Now, whilst on the school premises, obviously the school has a special duty of care. That just means it's not a standard duty of care. It is a flexible, enhanced duty of care for that particular child and their particular needs and their particular risk. How can they possibly do that if they were to carpool 2 students into one taxi and send them in the same taxi? Short answer is they wouldn't. They wouldn't do that. They would probably, in my view, send them in separate taxis. And therefore it's 2 lots of £8,000. Therefore, 13,000 odd breakfasts that they could pay for each and every single child for whom they've had to pay these taxis. So not only are the numbers a bit dubious, the logic a bit dubious, and what they tell you a bit dubious, in that I think they are gaslighting the nation into thinking that this is a magically new scheme that is going to be drastically changing the education of children, which of course I disagree. I don't think that is the fundamental pivot factor that's going to make any difference. But apart from all that, we have the hypocrisy that jumps out with recent government spending. As reported here by The Times, this analysis found that David Lammy, his department, has spent £521,000 on restaurants and bars in the first 4 months of this Labour government. The venues where the money was spent was obscured in most cases, spending marked as leisure events. Also a source of extravagance, the taxpayers fronted an £810 bill for office staff to do a team building exercise in an escape room in Kent, £872 on trophies for an awards ceremony, £623 for tickets to a music thing. 5 staff of the Department of Transport put up in hotels, 5-star in Barcelona, at over £5,000 for 4 people at an IT conference, and the list goes on and on. Now, of course, governments have to spend some money here and there, but if the government is looking at this Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, to model on Elon Musk's approach to it, I think that's a very good place to start. And if they do want to roll out things such as these breakfast clubs, it should be done properly, but it should not be done at the expense of everybody else. And it certainly should not be done at the expense of many tens of thousands of private school children that are being forced out because they simply can't afford these fees anymore. And I just don't buy Bridget Phillipson's argument that some schools close down every year, sadly, therefore it doesn't matter that our policy is forcing some out of business. She didn't really have a lot to say about that. She refused to answer the question. She refused in interview to really acknowledge that it's a really bad thing. It's the equivalent of saying, well, some people die every year, so if we make this thing that happens to have a side effect that kills people, well, it's fine because people were dying every year anyway. And that's quite a drastic analogy, but it's exactly the same thing. It's just like saying, well, this was happening anyway, so the fact that we did this that's really bad doesn't matter because it was already happening. That's the same logic. That's the same silly, stupid logic that's going on here. Just like saying, and here's the thing, this is pure speculation on my part, you understand, but I think, now I don't think I'll be far wrong, I think that the figure of £450 has been floated out there because that's what they're going to allocate to tax people on and pull it from somewhere per child, £450 per child, and that's what they'll end up raking in from tax somewhere else. Whereas really, they're allocating 60 pence per child for each school and not accounting for all of the extra costs that the schools got to go through. And that's why some of these schools are already pulling out. But I'll link the articles. By all means, go and read them yourselves, form your own views. I'm not telling you what to think. I am airing my views here, this legal commentary, which I'm entitled to do, all of which my opinion, and you can all go and read what I've based this on in those articles below. Let me know what you think. I think this is ridiculous. I think they are gaslighting the nation, and I just don't think it's going to work overall. I think if children, and I mean this with the greatest respect, but with all sincerity, if children are going to have the best start in life, the best chance at education, the best chance to be successful, it starts at home. It starts with the parents being absolutely supportive of that child to encourage them into education, to sometimes forcefully, sometimes with the robust encouragement that they absolutely need. Sometimes we all know that children can be lazy. We can be lazy sometimes. I can certainly be lazy sometimes. We all need that kick up the backside to get out and do some good work. And children are no exception. And that starts at home with children. It is our responsibility as parents, those of us who are parents, to ensure that those children go to school ready to learn with the right attitude and everything else, treating other people with courtesy and respect. One thing that, I'm going on a bit of a rant now, but one thing I really have a distaste for in recent years, maybe it's a sign of a few more years behind me, but one thing that I do have a real distaste for is the disparity between courtesy and integrity as I walk around and I see people. It very much is, and I hate to say it and sound ageist, but it very much is. I see some very different attitudes of courtesy and integrity as we go out and about. The way people treat other people that they don't have to treat very well says quite a lot about who they are and a lot about their personality and a lot about what you can expect them to achieve in life. Because if they are absolutely discourteous and they don't show anybody else respect, that will reflect in their level of success in life. Now, that's not to say you've got to be nice to everybody all the time, but your general attitude towards other people, towards life, etc., that does say a lot about what you will achieve in life. So let me know your thoughts very generally on that in the comments below. Please do like the video and subscribe. That helps my channel grow. I really appreciate that. And as always, thank you for watching.